Welcome everybody. It's episode number 6 of Zeal Podcast, I believe. What you're about to watch today is an episode where I sit down with Andie Steele-Smith. Now, Andie is a gang pastor. So he was originally from Australia, and he felt that the Lord called him to come to Cape Town and minister to gangs and gang-ridden communities in Cape Town to try and change their world for the better. The Lord is using him powerfully, and he has used him powerfully. He's gone viral on Instagram and TikTok recently for his reels where he goes into these communities and the people just love him because he is just shining the Lord's light onto these communities. But you'll hear his stories that are absolutely miraculous. Others are super frightening and some I can't quite believe. But Andie, if you're watching this, you're such a legend. Thank you so much for coming on and taking time to sit down with me. I'm super, super happy with how this episode turned out. I hope you guys enjoy it most of all. And if there's one thing that you take from this, apart from Andie's incredible stories and the history of gangsterism in Cape Town and a little bit about how the gangs operate and territories and how they work, if there's one thing I want you to take, please, it is that you can really be the change that you want to see in this world. And the question is, are you brave enough to trust in the Lord and to act on it? So be brave and trust in the Lord and walk with him. Enjoy the episode. Thank you so much for watching.
Andie Steele-Smith, welcome to Zeal.
Hey, great to be here. Love the name.
When did you meet Jesus Christ?
That's a really good question. I probably met him about 1,000 times in my life, maybe a million, but 4th of August, 1977, I was 10 years and 1 month to the day. That was the day that I took my faith personally and committed my life to him. Like yourself, I grew up in a Christian family, and it would have been almost impossible for me not to have followed Jesus because it was just kind of the foundation of our family as such. But I remember taking that step of faith on the 4th of August, 1977.
Wow.
And then many times since then, I've kind of recommitted my life and said, hey, I need to do things better and so on. And I've had, there's a long answer to a short question, but I've had a number of really profound kind of penny drop moments where my faith has fundamentally shifted as opposed to just being on a
straight trajectory.
A straight trajectory. So one of those would have been early 2006, so 20 years ago. I was living in London, investment banker, living the high life, beautiful houses, beautiful cars, beautiful wife, beautiful everything, except for me. And I heard I was invited to Hillsong Church in London, and I heard a message from a preacher there, a guy called John Bevere, who's an itinerant preacher. He and I have subsequently become good friends.
Wow.
John preached a really profound message on the fear of the Lord, loving God and fearing God. And that for me was a penny drop moment because I grew up in a relatively grace-less family, good family, but more law than grace, if you like. And just old school, a bit like an Afrikaans. I tell people I grew up in a Bloemfontein farmers type family, but in Australia. At that point in time, I got a bit of a grasp of what God's calling on my life was, because there was a response required, which was the fear of the Lord. I had to fear him, and therefore there had to be a response. It wasn't just fire insurance for eternity as such. And then I had another radical encounter with the Holy Spirit in 2009, I think it was, at a place called the Los Angeles Dream Center in Los Angeles, not surprisingly. And that was probably the thing that propelled me most of all to what I'm now doing in Africa. But yeah, long answer, short question, or short question, long answer. 4th of August, 1977.
Wow.
You can edit everything else out if you want to.
Well, that leads me to my next question. You were an investment banker. I read that you had jobs all over the world, Australia, UK, US.
Yeah.
How does an investment banker go and turn into a gang pastor? Because like you've said, you've had a couple moments, and I assume those were extremely profound.
Yeah. I think it's a funny thing, as you get older, and I'm definitely getting older, maybe I am already older, but anyway, as you get older or are older, as the case may be, you look back on your life and you realize that the things that you couldn't work out why God had you do those things or why you did those things, and whether it was whether you felt it was in God's path or will at the time, or whether you were being rebellious, but nevertheless, the things that you've done, you can look back and go, I can see that there was actually God's wisdom in every one of those things, even the things that I did a bit wrong. So, when I was at university to start with, I was working as a bouncer in a nightclub of all things, which meant that I got gun pointed pretty regularly. And that was one of the first things that really was a great blessing to me when it came to working with the gangs, because the first time I got gun pointed, it was kind of almost like a Crocodile Dundee moment of a, that's not a gun, this is a gun kind of thing. Like, I wasn't scared because I'm like, come on, man. Like, I was seeing guns.
I've seen that before, yeah.
30 years ago. You know what I mean? That doesn't answer your question, but to answer your question more realistically, I love to introduce myself when I speak in churches in America, in particular, as 20, 30 years as an investment banker, which is a polite word for professional asshole, and or a hustler, but just a hustler in a nice suit, and so. So really the hustler element, if you like, the ability to spot a deal, see a deal, work out how to make a buck out of things, etc., albeit in the millions or the billions as opposed to the 10 rands, 50 rands, 100 rands, that's a common thread with many of these guys on the street. And so when we started engaging with each other, it was just, there was a common language, there was a common touch as such. I just described myself as a hustler in a very expensive suit.
Yeah.
And I'd gone to a school much like, say, Bishop's or Sachs here in Cape Town, the equivalent like that in Australia and Sydney. And so it wasn't really a particularly radical progression. But to answer your question as to how I got involved with the gangs, we moved to South Africa. We'll probably talk about that separately, but we moved to South Africa as a family, got involved in a township called Versanekral. And there was one point that was particularly kind of a penny drop moment for me. And that was, I had a young family, 3 kids, 9 years of age, 6 and 2, I think, from memory. And I'd heard that the mother had died that morning. The dad was already dead. So all of a sudden there's a 9-year-old girl who becomes mum and dad of this family. And I knew that the only thing that I could do to make their life better that particular day was to turn up at about 11 o'clock at night, because that's when I heard, I probably heard at 9 or 10 o'clock that the mum had died. Turn up in the squatter camp in the middle of the night and take food, and at least they'd go to bed that night with a full belly. Wow. And as I was walking through the lanes in the squatter camp, Pluckers camp in Versanekral, to get to them, there were 2 young Xhosa gangsters standing there with their hands down, one hand down their pants, one hand on a 9mm. And they didn't want to get me, let me get past. And so I said to the guy who was clearly in charge, I said, hey, dude, your fly's undone. And he looked at me as if to say, what the heck? And I thought, hang on, fly, that's an Australian word. Sorry, man, your zip's undone. And he looked down and he said, no, it's not. So I reached down, pulled it down and said, now it is. And he had a choice. Do I shoot this guy or do I pull my zip up? And he did what most men would do and go, I don't want to be flapping in the wind. So he pulled his zip up. And I tell people jokingly, at that point I had him in the palm of my hand, not literally, but figuratively speaking. But I realized that at that point in time, that these guys who are so-called gangsters, they're not to be feared. They're just guys. They've just got the same issues as you and I, perhaps deeper issues in some ways, perhaps not. And so that was kind of the first thing that took me to the gangs. And then I had 2 other really transformative moments where I was building, or in fact, I wasn't really building. I was managing a process of building, because I'm not particularly good with my hands. 50 shacks, or 47 shacks to be precise, in a place called Igoli, right in the heart of Mbekwini, out near Paarl and Wellington. And my adopted boys, Franklin and Junior, were with me, and I think we had 6 other lads from Versanekral helping to build shacks there. And we had 2 really transformational experiences. One was, there was a gentleman who's still a great friend, Rodney, who was a 26 gang general. Wow. And the community had told me to stay away from him because he'd kill me in a heartbeat. And I looked at him and I thought, man, this guy is skinnier than chickens I've seen in Kailichi or Bubuletu. He can't be that dangerous. And he wasn't. We became friends, and then he gave his life to the Lord. And then on the one day that we were helping in that community and he wasn't there helping us and therefore protecting us without us asking him for protection, 6 or 7, I think it was 7 young Lighty gangsters came to attack us, and they had knives and pungas. And I went to smack the leader of them in the teeth, because I thought, hey, I'm going to protect my kids first and foremost, And as I reached out to put my hand behind his head so I could, cock my right fist, so to speak, which I'm not proud of, but that's what I was doing. I just felt God say to me, hug him and kiss him instead. And so that's exactly what I did. And he burst into tears and dropped his punga and said, can I have a hammer to bill with you? And so for me, that was the ultimate penny drop moment where I realized that the gang lads have exactly the same challenges as my kids in the township. And that is that 90% of them, and that's just a rough approximate number, but 90% of them just don't have a father. And ultimately what they need, even if they don't know it, is they need a father to point them to the Father. And so that's how I got involved with the gangs.
And what is the reaction that you get when you share the gospel, which is the ultimate story of love and sacrifice and surrender to a gang member whose whole life has been defined by violence and, I don't know, inadequacy sometimes?
Yeah.
There's a serious contrast. I think it must be all the more beautiful when you do, like, when they truly receive God.
100%. Jesus himself said the greatest of these is love. And that to me is just the ultimate thing. Just yesterday, I was at a school in the Cape Flats, primary school, and there was 31 learners who'd been involved in stabbings and various different things, etc. Not all of them had stabbed or been stabbed, but there was a significant number of learners that have significant dysfunction. Beautiful kids, amazing kids, but tough backgrounds and tough histories, etc. The most problematic, as the teachers told me, of the kids in that school, beautiful young man, about my size, and he's like 13 or something years of age or 14 years of age. And as I was sort of talking and counseling him with a couple of the other lads a little later on in the day, I looked at him and I said, "You need to know that I love you." And I said it again and again and again. And I said it 4 times. I said, "I love you." And then later on, I said to him, "How do you feel when I told you that I love you?" And he went, "Confused, but now I feel very good." And for many of these guys, they've not been told that. And that's not their fault. That's not even their parents' fault if their parents are around. It's the system's fault. You've got generations of people that have been told that you're worthless, you're useless, you're a dog, you're a slave, you're a this, you're a that. And so, of course, they're not going to be able to express love in a good way because apart from anything else, there's just desperation. I've got to work to try and make enough money to have bread for myself, let alone my wife, let alone my kids, et cetera, et cetera. Everything is just a struggle, like at a level that privileged South Africans would, generally speaking, have no idea about.
Yeah.
And so when you just pour, I describe it as being simple as this: you pour one drop of love into a bucket of hopelessness, and that one drop of love is enough to invade and infect the entire bucket. So it's quite extraordinary. And generally speaking, when I share the gospel with the gangs, I'll happily tell you how I do it if you want me to.
Please.
But generally speaking, when I share the gospel with the gangs, most, if not all, will respond and say, "I want that peace.
Wow.
I want that hope. I want that goodness. I want that mercy. I want that love." Here's how I share the gospel, or the gospel to the gangs. And I really felt that God spoke fairly clearly to me and gave me this message before the first gang funeral that I did. And I'm a rich white boy. I'm about to speak at a gang funeral, and what the heck do I know? Absolutely nothing. I'm not even a preacher per se.
Yeah.
I'm just a guy.
How did you find yourself at a gang funeral?
That's a really good question. So I was about to go surfing in Manenberg. I love surfing. I love Manenberg. I had a really nice car at the time. I had a few, but I had an Audi S8, the car that they have in the Transporter movie and so on. and I'd gone surfing in Manenberg. It was perfect weather, 3 foot offshore, glassy, lined up. And I just felt an uncomfort or a discomfort about going surfing that day, which was really unnatural for me. I was like, I want to be there, but I knew I wasn't meant to surf. And so I drove through Manenberg. I'd already been ministering to the gangs in Manenberg for probably a year and a half, I think, at this point in time, just doing braais on street corners with them and so on Friday nights. And there was shooting in a particular part of Manenberg between 2 gangs.
Wow.
And I'd heard about this, and I thought, you know what, these guys need to know that I'm prepared to die for them, because if they know that, they'll listen to me and they'll trust me and they'll respect me, and then I'll be able to share the gospel with them. Little did I know that was going to happen in that following week. And as I walked down this particular street, basically saying to the guys, as in by my presence, if you don't stop shooting, you're going to kill me, and I know that you both care for me, so it's your choice.
Yeah.
And so they stopped shooting and didn't start again. And as I got to the end of the street, there was a body on the ground. Beautiful man. I didn't know him before that. A gentleman called Jerome. And so I went to his family, and his family said, obviously my dad, my son, my brother, etc., has passed, but we don't know what to do. We don't know how to put on a funeral and so on. And I said, well, I'll help you with that. And I didn't know how to, do a funeral per se. By God's grace, actually, the owner of Pinetown Funerals, which is, I think, a huge funeral company in Durban and Joburg. They'd not done a single funeral in Cape Town, but they contacted me and said, we'll do it for nothing. And so
That's incredible.
They did this wildly extravagant funeral for this guy. And then I prayed the night before the funeral. I said, Lord, what am I going to give as a message at this funeral? And he dropped into my spirit the gang gospel. And the gang gospel is simply this. I say to the guys, why did you join a gang? And 100% of them give me the same answers. It's belonging, it's protection, it's fatherhood, it's brotherhood, it's somebody to provide for me, it's somebody that would die for me. And so I say, cool. I'm going to tell you a story about the greatest gangster that ever lived. We're going to call him OG. And he did those things better than anybody who's ever walked the face of the planet. And do you want to hear that story about the original gangster, the greatest gangster that ever lived? And 100% of them will say, I want to hear that story. And so I'll just tell them the story of Jesus. I'll say this guy was born. He was born surrounded by animal crap. Before he turned one, the police of the day wanted to kill him, just like the police here want to kill many of you. But then he lived the most extraordinary life. He was spat on, he was beaten, he was whipped, he was chained, and ultimately he was killed. And you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Jesus. And then I tell them John 3:16, Romans 10:9, and then I just pray and wait for the Holy Spirit to move and say, if you want to meet my Jesus, let me know.
Wow.
And usually they'll all respond.
That's incredible. What gives you that courage to walk straight down the street and with two opposite gangs shooting? Like, what do you think allows you to be that brave?
If I'm really honest, I think there's a screw loose in my head. And I think a lot of other people would agree. I've just never really had fear in life. And it's a God-given thing. It's not that I'm brave or courageous or, I think there is a little bit of stupidity in it, if I'm totally honest, at a human level. But I think God just gave me the ability to say, from a really young age, because my parents imbued in me, you're going to meet Jesus. It's all going to be okay. I've never worried about things. I've never worried about whether I die or whether I live, etc.
Wow.
And so, that's it really. I don't fear man. I fear God. And I tell people all the time, don't fear man. Who cares what they do or what they think, etc.
Praise
Fear
God.
That's the only thing.
For doing this research for this podcast, I was trying to research a little bit about the gangs in Cape Town. The earliest gangs came about in the 1940s, and then I think it was Hard Livings was in the 70s and 80s, and then the Numbers gangs came about in about the 90s. For anyone listening to this right now, including me, who don't know much about how the gangs work and how long they've been around, could you give us just a brief history lesson, or tutorial?
Sure. It won't be particularly accurate from a historical perspective.
That's okay.
I give you that disclaimer. But look, my understanding and certainly my experience with the gangs is that, and this is a radical statement, but the gangs, Cape Town would be worse without the gangs than it is with the gangs. Wow. And the reason I say that is, yes, they do some terrible things. There's no two ways about that. And yes, they've been guilty and complicit of doing many, 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 many bad things over a very, very, very long period of time. I suspect it probably goes back prior to the 1940s, to be honest with you, but I don't know for sure. However, they also bring order. They also bring discipline. In one part of Manenberg, one of my sons, spiritual sons, Leroy, American leader, gunned down and killed a year and a half ago, or almost a year and a half ago. He was a really great man. He was also a really great bad man. There was that duality to him, but he brought order in that part of the community, and the part of the community that he used to rule is now just a bit chaotic. There's not order there. I've had physical threats of danger to me that would never have happened when he was around.
Really?
Because it would not stop. I tell people that the loudest sound I ever heard in Manenberg is not a 9mm, but when Leroy's kid brother stole a bag of nachos from the back of my bucky when we were delivering food during lockdown, and Leroy got him and cracked him in the skull and knocked him cold. That's the loudest sound I ever heard in Manenberg. So, yeah, I don't know if that's helpful or if I've gone off the path too much. So,
thank you. Is there anything about gang culture that you respect?
Yeah, definitely. Tapping into where we just left off, it's a respect element of things. There's an order. there's a father, there's a brotherhood, there's a family. People will, by and large, die for each other, etc. And there's lots of lies behind gangsterism, and the whole construct of gangsterism is in itself a lie. The foundational place that gangsterism started in itself was a lie. And I should have addressed that in my prior comments. I'll address that now.
Please.
So people ask me all of the time, they say, how can you tell if an area has gangsters? And I said, it takes one Nazi, one orange, or one Mandarin. They say, what do you mean? I said, if I walk down a street and I throw a Nazi in the street, and if the kids beat the hell out of each other to get that Nazi, then there's gangs there. And people say to me, oh, is that because the kids replicate violence because that's what they see? And I say, no. I said, gangsterism is a construct of lack. It's a construct of poverty and hopelessness.
Wow.
And my personal belief is that, and I say this regularly to people, I say, just last night I was preaching to a gang in Mitchell's Plain that I'd not met before last weekend, and around a braai at night. And I said to them, I said, boys, I said, can I ask you a question? I said, is gangsterism a white thing, a black thing, or a colored thing? And 100% of people will either say, they'll think, the answer should be everybody. So I'll say everybody, but 90% of people will say it's a black or a colored thing, usually a colored thing. And I say, no, you're wrong. I say, what do you mean? I say, it's a white thing. And they say, how can it be white? I don't know of any white gangsters. And I said, no, but white man created gangsterism, because as long as the colored people of the Cape Flats, who made the Cape Flats colored people by virtue of the Group Areas Act, putting, I'm not sure how many people will move for District 6, but proportionally, 1 million people into a space that's big enough for 50 or 100,000, of course there's going to be a lack of school pencils, a lack of school rubbers, a lack of school shoes, a lack of water, a lack of girlfriends, a lack of Nazis, a lack of everything. And so you're going to fight like hell.
Yeah.
And I say to the gangs regularly, I say, if you want to see an end to apartheid, because apartheid is still happening right here, right now, by virtue of what you do and what you live every day. If you want to see an end to apartheid, it's 30-something years since it officially ended, but it's still happening right here, right now, today. If you want to see an end to apartheid, stop fighting each other, because the only reason you fight each other is because white man made you guys fight each other, because the longer that you fight, you'll be the person who works in my garden in Camps Bay, but I'll keep my house in Camps Bay, and you'll never come and try and take your land back. And land equality is one of the things that has to change here. Not a popular topic. It won't get you a lot of people liking that statement, but it's truth. You can't steal from somebody and not give back what's taken, or at least some of what's taken. And there has to be equality. There has to be equity in anything in society. And if South Africa, and particularly the privileged South Africans, want to see South Africa change for the better, then they're going to have to give something up. And if not, then it's going to get worse, not better. Simple as that.
So who's ready to blame? Is it the apartheid government that's 100%. Still to blame?
100%, without a doubt. 100% the apartheid government, and the fact that there hasn't been a change, a fundamental change. Privileged people will often say, but I can't get a job here. Well, most privileged people don't need to get a job. They're wealthy enough and wise enough and well enough trained and educated that they can start their own enterprise and create jobs for other people, et cetera, et cetera. I'm not saying that's the case for all, but for many or for most, that's probably the case. But do me a favor, just repeat your question again. Obviously, this will be edited out. I just
no, it's okay.
Where did you go in that previous question?
I just said, who's ready to blame? Is it
yeah. So who's to blame? So absolutely the apartheid system, the apartheid government, those who profited from it, etc., absolutely to blame. And people say regularly, they say, oh, when is saying sorry enough? And I say, when change has been effected.
Wow.
But change hasn't been effected. At the end of the day, and I'm going to use an approximation here, but for 90% of the colored people of South Africa, nothing's changed. They still live in the ghetto. They still live in the slum. They still have poor schools, overcrowded schools, lack of access to basic infrastructure, to electricity, to water, to healthcare, et cetera, et cetera. When you or I need to go to hospital here in Cape Town, we'll be seen in an hour or two at most, maybe 5 minutes if it's a net care. I've taken hundreds of people to hospital that have had to wait 5 days to be seen. It's like a war zone in the waiting room in a public hospital, sometimes, depending on where you are, of course. Yeah. And it's not the doctors or the nurses' fault. It's under-resourcing, etc. Because ultimately, the system is still rigged to give people that look like me or like yourself a favor and to give people who used to be, one of the most ironic statements in South Africa is formerly underprivileged people that were previously underprivileged. I can count probably on 2 or 3 or 4 hands at most the number of people that I've ever met that were formerly underprivileged that aren't still underprivileged.
Yeah.
Now that partly shows the people that I hang out with, but the vast majority that used to be underprivileged are still underprivileged.
Yeah.
And so it won't change until we change that equation.
Mm. We often talk about the people who join gangs, but what about the ones who don't? What kind of strength does it take to grow up in that environment and choose not to join a gang?
I think it's miraculous when people
Wow.
don't join gangs, literally. And I say that regularly. I was preaching at a church in Pelican Park in the Cape Flats last weekend, and the pastor and his family, beautiful man, Pastor Steve Flandor, huge kudos to him for what he's doing in the community there, he and his whole family. And I sat with this whole family for lunch, and I said, "You guys are all walking miracles." And they looked at me and they said, "What do you mean, Pastor?" And I said, "Well, the system is created to make every single young man of color a gangster, because that's kind of the only choice for the vast majority." And so when somebody exercises a different choice, a man like Dr. Randall Ortel, the first colored doctor, I think he was the first colored doctor, I might be wrong on that, but I think he was the first colored doctor out of Manenberg. He put himself through med school by driving a taxi. And if you drive a taxi, you're probably carrying an Uzi or a 9mm under the seat to keep yourself alive. Not saying Randall did, don't know, but you know, that the odds and the obstacles that a young man or a young woman, but particularly a young man in this context of the gangs of color, has to overcome in order to achieve basic things that you and I achieved easily because it was on a platter for us, relatively speaking, are huge. And so one of the graces that God's given me is to, and I love to be controversial when I sit with a colored community that I haven't met with before, and I'll say to them, "Are you and I the same?" And they'll look at me and say, "Yes." And I'll say, "No, we're not." And they'll look at me a little alarmed and think, "What does this white racist guy think?" And I'll say, "I'll tell you we're not the same. And I'll tell you why we're not the same. We're not the same because each and every one of you is better than me."
Yeah.
And they look at me like, "What are you saying?" And I said, "I've never had to scrabble for bread. I've never had to wake up in the morning and think, do I have electricity in the house? I've never had to think, do I have an iron to iron a shirt, to go to a job interview, to get a job, etc., etc." My life has been easy. So every one of them is better than me because just turning up in life, just being alive, just being a good father or a good brother or a good son or whatever the case might be, all of those things are exceptional achievements for these young men from these communities, let alone actually getting a job, let alone being able to progress up from a basic level job, et cetera, et cetera. So, you know, my hat's off to these guys. I think all of them are absolutely flipping legends.
Yeah.
Because they've achieved proportionally so much with proportionally so little.
What do you think? What do you think the biggest misconception is that the privileged people have about these communities in Manenberg and the Cape Flats?
It's a really good question. I think, and I say I think, I might be wrong, but I think it's largely a judgment of, look at these people, they fight like animals, or they kill each other, or, you know, it's looking down the nose going, look at them, I'm better, you're worse. But what the people of privilege don't realize is that we made these people just like they are. It's our fault. It's a fault of apartheid. It's a fault of white privilege. It's a fault of having a systemic system of class and racism that still exists today. And so I think that's a great fundamental shift that has to change. Just getting that mindset change of, hang on, these people are just like me, but for an opportunity, but for a good dad, but for a good school, etc. And one of the things that I've had the privilege of doing is taking privileged white people into the communities and getting them working during lockdown, for example, delivering food with the gangs. And I think one of the most, you know, we delivered hundreds of thousands, I think millions, I'm not sure, but anyway, many hundreds of thousands of meals during lockdown to people in Manenberg and all across the Cape Flats and different parts of the Western Cape, even the Eastern Cape a little bit.
Wow.
But using the gangs and so on to distribute. And we took privileged people with us wherever we could, because I wanted to see transformation in their lives and in their families and in their churches and in their schools. And I think we had more impact on the privileged side of the scale than we even did in the township, even though we saw radical change and peace between gangs and so on and so forth happening there.
A lot of people that I'm sure you interact with a lot of young people that are my age. They've grown up completely different to me. Like our whole conversation's been about like they've grown up having to struggle a lot more than I have per se. But what do you see in them?
Are we talking in the underprivileged or the privileged?
The underprivileged.
The underprivileged. I see, and I'll give you an example. Again, I was at this primary school yesterday. I walked straight up and I recognized who the 3 troublemakers were straight away. And I walked up to them and I said, shake my hand. And the first one, he said, good morning, sir. And I said, you are a king. He looked at me, he said, why do you say that, sir? I said, because everybody here says that you're worthless, you're useless, and that you're a bad student, you're a bad kid. Am I right? And he looked at me and said, absolutely, sir. And I said, but the first thing you exhibited to me was respect. You called me sir. You didn't need to do that. I don't expect to be called sir. I'd rather just be called Andie, to be truthful. But you exhibited respect and honor. So I see a king. And as soon as you tell somebody that they're a king, well, they start to actually stand a little like a king and walk and talk like a king, as opposed to being told that you're worthless, you're useless, et cetera, et cetera. So genuinely, I see every single person of color in this country is better than me. And I see every single person in this country, every person of color in particular, as people that have suffered great loss, great systemic hardship, great obstacles of opposition and oppression, and still to this day. And so again, with not trying to repeat myself, but I see them as heroes. I see them as extraordinary people. If you give a person who's been through deep trauma and deep opposition, if you give them just the tiniest chance to succeed in life, 99% of them will take that, they'll hang on to it, and they'll never ever let go. One of the great revelations I had before I'd even ever visited South Africa, back at the Los Angeles Dream Center, I think this particular visit there was about 2010. I was going there to speak to some of the guys in the recovery program there.
Oh.
And I looked at this building, a building that could fit 5,000 people in it. It was a disused hospital for 5,000. I think it was 5,000 that was turned into a rehab for, a similar-ish number of people. And I had a picture that I feel that God gave me of a gold mine, or a diamond mine, actually it was. And it was the revelation, or the realization I had, was that most of the truly great entrepreneurs in the world aren't people who come from privilege. They're people who've come through extreme challenges in life. You hear about the guy who was adopted as a baby, didn't know who his parents were, ended up in reform school at 14. By 18, he had started a business. By 28, he had 100 businesses. By 38, he had 1,000, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
That's a pretty common theme around the world, where some of the greatest business people come from privilege. Many of the greatest entrepreneurs come from the streets, from a place of darkness and hustle, because you have to overcome. And that's one of the core traits of being an entrepreneur, is you got to keep getting back up. It's a bit like the Bible says, the righteous fall 6 times, but they get up a 7th. You could equally say the entrepreneur falls 14 times, but they get up a 15th.
So we've talked all about the problems. What do you think are the solutions? Like, what can be done to help the situation?
You know what? When I have the privilege of speaking in privileged churches in South Africa, which is not that often, not surprisingly, but when I do, I love to challenge the congregation, and particularly the men. I say, if you want to see radical change in your lifetime in South Africa, you need to be the change. You need to actually you need to reach out to one person. It may not have to be 100 or 100,000 or a million, but you need to reach out to one. And so I say to those men, I say, if you want to see radical change here, stand to your feet, and I'm going to pray with you, but I'm going to give you a challenge. And the challenge is simply this: in the next 30 days, find a young man of color that you have never ever met before. So he's not, your son's best friend at school, for example, but somebody who's not in your regular circle. Could literally be somebody standing at a taxi rank, but find a young man of color, walk up to him and just pray and say, Lord, show me the one that I'm meant to go to. Walk up to him and say, son, I want to do 2 things. I want to give you 2 things. Can I give you 2 things? And with their permission, then you give them the 2 things. And the 2 things are, first of all, a hug, because a hug is absolutely radical and transformational. The hug that I gave that gangster that wanted to stab me, that's what caused him to collapse in himself and go, oh my goodness, I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to deal with this. A hug is such a transformational thing. Yesterday, again at this school, the two gang leaders that had stabbed each other in this primary school, I got them to, and when I say I got them to, I really felt God gave me the idea. It was a silly idea, but it seemed to work, to get these two boys to look at each other, then to sit next to each other, then to shake hands, then to apologize, and then to hug each other. They literally walked away from that meeting arm in arm.
Wow.
Because a hug is so transformative. So if every privileged man found one person that they've never met before who's a person of color and said, I'm going to give you two things. Number one, a hug. Number two, I'm going to give you my telephone number. And I'm going to say, I can't solve all of your problems. I can't do everything. I can't change everything. But I'm in your corner and I'm going to do something rather than nothing. And that might mean, that you give them one chance, one time, that you give them $100, or that you drive them somewhere to a job interview, or that, whatever it might be. Or it might be that you just send them a Bible verse each week, or send them a message and say, I love you, my boy. I see you. I'm a man. And by the way, when I use the term my boy, I'm talking father to son, nothing of color. But I honestly think that if every single person of privilege or relative privilege in this country, particularly the men, found one person that was underprivileged, and I know there's a lot more underprivileged than there is privilege, so maybe it needs to be 10 each, etc. But if we started with one, we'd see radical transformation in our lifetime.
I think I know the answer to this question I'm about to ask you, but if Jesus walked into Cape Town today, where do you think he would spend most of his time?
I think he'd be right by my side, not because he likes me, but because he likes the people that I have the privilege of spending time with.
Wow.
And I don't say that with arrogance. I say that just going, he certainly wouldn't be in Camps Bay. And it's not to say that he wouldn't go to Camps Bay. Don't get me wrong. And I can't speak for Jesus and say, oh, I know what he would do. I don't. But I suspect he'd start in Longer Street, or in Thames Avenue, or Thames Walk in Manenberg, etc. And then he'd work his way and walk his way from there.
When you pray for the people you're helping, what do you find yourself asking the Lord for the most?
It's a really good question. For peace, for protection, I regularly, I don't have a set prayer. I never have a set prayer. I've prayed for I've prayed probably hundreds of thousands of times for millions of people now. But so you find yourself repeating some things at times, and it's not intentional. But one thing that I will pray quite regularly, and I feel it at the time that I'm meant to pray for them, and that is for the Holy Spirit to surround them with angels the size of lions, to protect their household and to protect the people, and to allow them just to walk with safety. That's one of the first things that I very often pray for, because if you have safety, you can possibly have hope. And if you can possibly have hope, you can possibly have a future. Yeah. But without hope, without safety, without hope, without a future, there's nothing. And I tell people regularly, Jeremiah 29:11, the most preached on verse, perhaps, the most quoted verse in Africa, the most misquoted verse in Africa, because people think that Jeremiah 29:11 says, "For I know the plans I have for you, says the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you." But it doesn't say that. It says that, and then it says, and plans to give you hope and a future. Yes. And the hope and the future are the keys. Yeah. Because prosper and not harm, it's like, I'm not going to get sick and I'm going to get a BMW. That's how people look at that very often, right? Yeah. But if you've been in a place of no hope, you don't have a future. And in almost every underprivileged community where I speak on the streets, or speak to a school, or preach at a gang funeral, whatever the case might be, if I ask the question, I say, put your hand up if you've been in a place where you've had no hope. There's never a hand that I've seen stay down. Because 100% of those people, I can honestly put my hand up and say, I've been in a place of no hope as well. So I can reflect to that. And I think probably most privileged people, if they were really honest with themselves, would say, I've been in a place of no hope at some point in my life. But, pretty much 100% of the people of the Cape Flats, for example, or the townships of South Africa, have been in a place of no hope. And so if you don't have hope, you don't have a future. But if you can regain hope, and in order to get hope, you have to have physical safety to know that you're not going to die in the next 5 minutes, then you've got a future. And that then changes things. If you think that you can look up and climb up, then you just might. But if you think you can't, and that you're in the gutter, and that things can only go down from there, well, you'll do the same thing that we do. If you've struggled with a sin before, right, and you go and get drunk, you'll then repeat the sin, the other sin, whatever the sin was, because we operate out of shame, right? And so if you don't have hope, you feel shame and you just go down rather than having hope and going up, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think that churches are fed sort of a domesticated gospel? Like, why are there not more people like you going out into the townships or into cave flats and just like on the ground going for it?
So the flippant answer is that my mother, whom I had the privilege of helping to bury almost a year ago, God rest her soul, beautiful lady of 96. Great one of faith. I'm not sorry for her. She's in a great place. Right now, yeah. 100%. But she would actually have said, "Thank God, there's nobody else like him." But the simple reality is, I think fear is a great motivator. You know, I never wanted to come to South Africa before I visited here because I'm an Aussie, and in Australia you hear so many stories from people who fled either just before or just after apartheid of all the terrors and the terrible things, etc. But most of those people, some have experienced terrible things, but many of those people have never even seen a terrible thing happen. Yeah. Fear is a terrible motivator. It motivates people terribly, you know. And so most people are fearful of the townships. Most people are fearful to go in, are fearful to go and speak to somebody, etc. The other thing that I say, and I'm kind of on a soapbox here, forgive me, but you gave me the soapbox. The other thing I say to people when I'm speaking in a church environment, particularly a privileged church environment, is I say, if you want to see South Africa transformed in your lifetime, go to Mug and Bean tomorrow, buy a coffee, and ask the waiter or the waitress their name. And that in and of itself is radical, because most people don't ask people their name. Yeah. Most people don't see or hear people. And one of my favorite scriptures to preach on, aside from just John 3:16 and Romans 10:9, they're my favorites without a doubt. But the other is the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the radical thing that the Good Samaritan did was he saw and he heard the broken man in the gutter. Yeah. And that's the mantra of my life in a sense. And that I think should be the mantra of all of our lives as Christians, whether we're really privileged, a little privileged, underprivileged. Let's look for those who are lost. Let's look for those who are not seen and not heard, and let's give them voice.
Yeah.
And let's just recognize them. And literally by just saying hello to people, people tend to smile and go, like, I feel seen and heard. I have so many people that think they're my friends in coffee shops and so on because I do that. All I did was say hi and ask them their name. I didn't do very much. It's pretty basic, right? Yeah. And yet most of the people who don't do that is not because they're bad people. It's probably because they think, they won't understand, or they won't want to be asked that, or they'll think it's insulting. And again, fear. It's fear of crossing boundaries and so on and so forth. Yeah. Probably one of the reasons why I've had the privilege of maybe creating a little bit of change, not an awful lot, but a little bit of change here, is that to me, there's no boundaries. You in this day and age, cancel culture and all of that, you're not allowed to call somebody my boy or my girl or sweetheart or my man, etc. Yeah. That's what I call everybody. And if I get canceled for it, I get canceled. At least I have a few friends at my funeral. That's okay. We're scared of crossing boundaries, and I think we need to cross boundaries. And that's what Jesus did, right? Yeah. He crossed the other side.
Absolutely.
Literally, figuratively, spiritually, at every level, he crossed to the other side. Yeah. And so as Christians, that's the exemplar that we're called to follow.
At the end of your life, Andie, what would make all of this worth it?
It's a really good question. I can honestly say I think it's already worth it, if that makes sense. And that's not said with arrogance. That's said with a sense of wonderment and wow. I pinch myself every day and I say, I can't believe that just happened, because I'm really good at one thing, and that is I'm really good at sinning. I'm a really, really competent sinner, and I mean that. And I don't say that with pride. I say that with truth. I can't believe that God would use me, a very, very competent sinner, to do the things and have the things happen that I've seen happen and so on. So yeah. I'm already thankful for that which has happened. I think for me personally, and particularly, in my 50s now, starting to think a little more about legacy and so on. My eyes turn more to my own family, my natural born and my adopted boys. And then, of course, there's many other semi-adopted that become part of that larger family unit. I had the wonderful privilege, literally the greatest privilege of my life. Actually, I don't know if it was the greatest privilege of my life, but it was the happiest day of my life, was walking my baby girl, Matilda. She'll hate me calling her my baby girl, but my beautiful, beautiful firstborn daughter, Matilda, down the aisle to marry the man of her dreams, and the man that we'd prayed for years, and the man that is absolutely worthy of her hand in marriage. He's an incredible man, Locke. Only 3 weeks ago, and so for me, knowing that my daughter and her husband are settled and sorted, and that their kids are settled and sorted, and settled and sorted doesn't mean a big house, etc. Those things are nice and they help.
Yeah.
But settled and sorted is, where do I sit with God?
Yeah.
Where's my salvation? Thus, what's the purpose of my life? What's my true north? And everything else follows its way from there. So that's probably the thing that at the end of my life, I was asked a question when I moved to South Africa. I took on the honorary leadership for a period of time of the Christian University here in Cape Town, called Cornerstone. And it was an honorary role for, I don't know, 3 or 6 months or something, just to help with transition and leadership there. And on my first or second or third day, one of the top students was brought to me, and I said to her, and I'd never asked this question before, but it seemed like a good question to ask at the time. I said to her, young lady, what do you want written on your tombstone? And if I'm totally honest, I can't remember the answer. I wish I had, but there's too many things that have happened in the interim, 15 years or so. But she then turned around and said, sir, can I ask you a question? I said, of course. And she said, what do you want written on your tombstone? I went, oh, nobody's ever asked me that question. But here was my answer. And the answer is still the same today. And that is, he tried to change the world. And just after he died, we actually found out that he did. And most of all, he's much missed by his family and friends. That's it, really.
That's awesome. Andie, what is one message you would give to my generation, privileged or underprivileged?
The fate of the world is largely in your hands. Go change it. Go make it happen. Leave it a better place than when you entered it. Yeah. So many of us have changed the world for bad, not for good. And I'd probably put myself until relatively recently, absolutely firmly in that category. Leave it a better place, and leave it a better place spiritually first and foremost. Leave it a better place in terms of, be a better dad to your kids than your dad even was to you, or his dad was to him, etc. Generationally make things better, not worse. Let's leave the planet in a better place. Let's actually take care of the planet rather than abusing it and treating it like rubbish. In every sense, just try and be good custodians of the people, number one, and the planet and the people around you and the circumstances and so on. And probably the next thing and the final thing I'd say on that is the message I love to share is play whatever is in front of you. Play whatever is in front of you. So if you have an opportunity to become CEO of an investment bank in New York, that's the opportunity that's in front of you. Play it, and play it hard. Yeah. And play it really, 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 really well. But if you have the opportunity to look after a broken, battered lady at a set of traffic lights in Stellenbosch as you're walking across the road from Res to go to college tomorrow, and you have the opportunity to say, come with me, let me take you, and you choose some food, you choose some coffee, etc., so that there's choice and dignity involved in that rather than just charity, which is still necessary and good. If that's what's in front of you, go play that. But next week or next month or next year, it might be the role of CEO of an investment bank in New York. And I'm not saying that wouldn't happen without that, but I suspect it probably might not.
Yeah. Andie, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen, for watching. Andie Steele-Smith.
Hey,
thank you.
God bless you. Go well.
Thanks, Andie. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Cheers.
Thank you.